After a 3-year moratorium, student loan payments are back for many borrowers, and all payments are set to resume next month. Making those payments will be a challenge for a lot of borrowers who owe roughly $35,000 on average, much higher than nearly every other country on earth. Kirk Carapezza, GBH News Managing Editor for Higher Ed, joins me now to discuss. Kirk, thanks so much for joining me today.
Good to be here.
You had a great story about student loan payments and what people should expect, but also, how other countries manage this as well. But just to start us off, can you tell us about where borrowers stand now?
Yeah, right now, borrowers are anxious, right? The payments have been on pause, as you said, for the last 3 years, but they're coming due again in October, and they're really anxious. There's been a lot of talk about this in the media with President Biden's initial $400 billion proposal to just kind of forgive millions of loans. The Supreme Court struck that down in June. The administration has other plans to forgive loans, but those face legal challenges. So I think borrowers right now are anxious. The interest have started to accrue this month, and payments are due at the will be due at the beginning of next month.
So people have a whopping, $35,000 on average in student loans. American education is very expensive. Higher education is very expensive here. But one thing that your story does is it points out that, things don't have to be this way.
Right. It could be a little more humane.
Exactly. And so, there are some countries where, there's no tuition at all. So,
right.
Some examples you use, for example, in Europe. Can you talk a little bit about some countries that, offer tuition-free college for their residents?
Yeah, in many countries, student loan systems and repayment plans differ significantly from the U.S. So it's not. There's many different models that we can point to. The economists I spoke to for the story pointed to Scandinavia first. You look at countries like Norway or Sweden, where education is widely seen as a public good, and tuition is completely free. Now, students do take out loans for their living expenses, or they point to Germany, where tuition at public universities is also free. I actually went there a few years ago. GBH sent me and my colleague Mallory Nopane to Cologne to look at the model there. It was around the time when Bernie Sanders was proposing free college during the campaign, and I remember interviewing students and walking around, capturing man on the street sound. And we would just ask them, what do you think about student loans? And they were looking at me like I was an alien. They had no idea what I was talking about. And that was when I learned that the word in German for loans is Schuld. And the word for debt is Schuld, which is the same word for guilt or shame. And they had no idea what I was talking about. Now, in other countries where tuition is not free, these countries have embraced more quote-unquote humane and sensitive approaches to student loan repayments.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because one of the really striking examples that you use in your story is the United Kingdom,
right.
Which I was surprised their students actually have more debt than American
students.
Right,
they have twice as much as us here in the U.S.
Which I was surprised by because college there, I believe, is cheaper, at least the semester's tuition.
Mm-hmm.
But what was interesting was how that repayment plan works. Can you talk a little bit about what they do in the UK?
Sure. First, start with the cost, right? The cost of public universities, it's, compared to the rest of Europe, it's relatively high. They charge, pretty high tuition and fees, but the amount is capped at about $12,000 a year, and students are entitled to loans that fully cover the cost, and 95% of them do take out loans. So that's why the loan amount there is so high. But there is this income-based repayment system that makes it easier for students to automatically deduct their payments through what's called employer withholding. And as you said, on average, students often borrow, twice as much as their American counterparts. But this income system provides kind of flexibility, especially during times like the COVID-19 pandemic, when job loss led to, automatic loan repayment pauses.
And so essentially they don't have to start paying back their loans until they can actually afford them.
Right, and if you're unemployed or don't have a job, you don't have to pay anything.
Right, and they don't have to worry about signing up for anything their employers take.
It's just automatic. It's automatic and seamless.
And so in reporting out this story, did you come across any examples outside the U.S., outside of the UK maybe, that where student debt, actually the system might be worse?
Yeah, right. It's easy to kind of look at our system. It's like, everyone else has it figured out. That's not the case. There are inflexible repayment systems that can lead to some serious issues elsewhere. We looked at Colombia. When borrowers there couldn't repay their loans during the pandemic, the system just completely imploded. And we looked at Argentina. That country is a good example of how access and free college don't always guarantee efficiency. The country rewrote its constitution back in 1949, and the plan was to make education a right for all. and make tuition at public universities free, they dropped entrance exams to make it extremely accessible. But that access and free tuition did not translate to better education outcomes. Degrees there can take 5 to 9 years to complete. Argentina has one of the highest dropout rates in the world. We also looked at Nigeria. That country, in order to boost college going and completion rates, they actually recently introduced a completely new student loan scheme. And it's got nice, lengthy repayments. You have 20 years to repay. There's zero interest, which sounds pretty good, right? That would sound great if you were, had 20 years and no interest. But there's strict consequences for that. Defaulters have to pay fines. You could go to jail. You can't pass go. You can't collect $200.
Yeah.
So there are, I think together though these examples, what we were trying to look at was to collect these examples and these stories. There are lessons from abroad that can be valuable for the U.S. as we kind of grapple with our own student loan challenges.
Right. And I mean, one thing that you did for the story was talk to people who are
right.
paying back their loans. In talking to people who now have to worry about this after years of confusion as to whether or not student loans are going to be canceled, they're
right.
paused, when they're going to come back, they keep extending the deadline. How are people feeling about this? How are people feeling about the lift of the moratorium?
Yeah, in a word, I think people are anxious, right? We've had this 3-year pause where people could take that money and spend it on something else, maybe get a car, buy a home, things that student loans prevent young people from doing. And, the president's major $400 billion student loan forgiveness program was blocked by the U.S. Supreme Court. I think there's just a lot of questions about what's real, what's going to stand up to legal challenges. The administration is now facing lawsuits over some of its other policy changes that are designed to make it easier for borrowers to pay back their loans. There was one lawsuit recently filed against the Biden administration for its plan to cancel $39 million for some 800,000 borrowers. And it was filed by this group out of D.C. It's a libertarian think tank called the New Civil Liberties Alliance. And I spoke with an attorney there with the alliance, and he accuses the administration of bureaucratic overreach. Kind of reminds you of Obamacare, right? It's like, how much power does the administration really have? And this group says that, Congress should enact laws. Congress should control the nation's purse strings, and argues that one reason fewer Americans are actually going to college straight out of high school now is that there's this exorbitant amount of easy credit to students, right? And this attorney that I spoke with, he argues that we could learn from countries that don't give unconditional loans, right? Because when you give out unconditional loans to whoever wants a degree to pursue whatever they want, colleges know that students can afford it, and they end up jacking up their prices, and the government is just giving people bags of cash.
Right. And so, just to close this out, where do President Biden's current plans stand? One of the things that he came out with after the Supreme Court struck down his cancellation plan was an income-driven repayment
right.
plan. Where does that
right.
stand now? Yeah,
it's called the SAVE program, and they're pushing it really hard. It launched over the summer. Just quickly, here's how it works. Your monthly payments are based on your income and your family size. Since its launch last month, at the end of last month, the administration says that more than 4 million borrowers have signed up so far. That includes about 70,000 borrowers here in Massachusetts. Now, the administration says this program has the potential to provide relief to more than 20 million people who either have federally held loans or private loan debt that can be consolidated into a federal direct loan. I've spoken to some people who think that this is the next legal battle, that they're just waiting for a plaintiff, and that conservatives are going to try to strike this down too. People in my newsroom this morning were coming up to me and saying, is this something I should sign up for? Definitely check it out and see. But there is a reality that in this political environment, it could face another legal challenge.
Yeah. Well, Kirk Carapezza, thanks so much for joining me today. Great story. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.